really mean.
Yeah.
Don't mess with them.
No.
No, don't get in a corner.
No, that's what I understand.
Okay, so today, I'm Bishop Ken Brin, and today I'm going to conclude a series of lectures, and we're going to look at, and we've got a lot more to study about Teilhard de Chardin, but this will be the end of this first series, and we're going to look at the Christic. An introduction is in place to look at Teilhard de Chardin when he wrote the Christic, because it very much gives us a feeling for what it's all about. First of all, he wrote this particular piece 1 month before he died. He died in April of 1955, and he dated this piece in March. How long he'd been working on it to get to that point of writing it, he was kind of that way, and he may have done a couple of runs at it before he got it the way he wanted it, because he tended to do that. But it was a piece written in the last month of, and before he died in April 1955. Now, in the process of doing this, he gives us in the very opening a really clear picture of what this is all about. And I'm just going to read a little bit of that to you in various times today, because it's well done. And he says at the introduction, "What follows is not a mere speculative dissertation in which the main lines of some long matured and cleverly constructed systems are set out. It constitutes the evidence brought to bear with complete objectivity upon a particular interior event, upon a particular personal experience, in which I cannot but distinguish the track followed by a general drift of the human as it folds in upon itself." Now, he's already said a lot of things in those two little sentences. First of all, he's telling you very clearly this is what has been on his heart for a long time. And he's wanting to, as he's getting back into life at this point, he's wanting to give you a very rich understanding of what he was saying, and what he's been saying all his life. And so this is the best summary that he could offer. Now, in the heart of matter, he also wrote that in order to make a point about what his life has been about, and he used some biographical notations, and instead of it being merely 11 pages in length, it's 70 pages. So he spends time in different parts of it in a little bit different way, and gives it some meaning. But in this one here, he's being fairly terse, fairly tight, and trying to communicate not so much the concept and some of the concepts in the heart of matter. He's trying to tell you what his life was like and what he lived with all his life, and this has been at the heart of him. So what's really curious, and what I think is very important, is at times to do something a little extra. Now, I have what I have done. I have got his books not only in my computer, but I also put them in my Kindle book, a Kindle electronic book holder here. And so I've got the Christic in there, and a whole lot of other of his books and things. But I also have in here the Divine Milieu. And I am reading the Divine Milieu while I'm studying the Christic. Divine Milieu was written, I think the dates that are given for it is 1927. He was certainly had done some preliminary work on the Divine Milieu in the war years, but I believe that that's when he really kind of felt he completed Divine Milieu, and it was the one that he took to the Catholic hierarchy for publication, to which they said no. But the problem was, as I told you last week, it was not the question of whether or not they really understood him. What happened was, he wrote an article meant for a particular person in discussion with him about some of the implications and some of the answers to the problem of original sin that his work brings up. And he knew that that was going to be contested or difficult for the hierarchy to handle, and so he was wanting some feedback and so on. Somehow, whether that person did or whether somebody got a hold of it and then took it out and thought they were doing a favor to whomever, they got it back up to the hierarchy, and I think it went all the way to Rome. And when it did, it exploded all over them, and they went crazy and got so afraid. And that was the primary piece of work. They had to put their foot down and do nothing with him. Obviously, in 1927, by 1927, he had written several materials, the equivalent of 3 or 4 books of material, or volumes of books, of articles and volumes. He had a lot of writing in by the time that work went to them. And so and they would have got that in the early 1920s. So when they got the divine milieu, there's no indication they read it, because they immediately reacted to the material that was in that private piece of material, and they never read his things that he had written all around that. For instance, one of the things that they were very afraid he was a pantheist, and he was going to be teaching pantheism to people, and as a distraction and an argument against Catholicism. And that's the furthest thing in the world. And if they would have read him, if they'd been reading what he'd been writing, they would have never accused him of being a pantheist, because he's very clear about it, and he talks about what pantheism is and what he's not. What he is, and so he's got a whole different explanation that makes sense. And the same thing is true, even more of the delicate area of the for them, the problem of the original sin and the first 3 chapters of Genesis. I mean, he certainly put a problem out in front of them. And if you know your American history a little bit, and the Scopes trial and a bunch of stuff like that, you know that these things were highly contested and being talked about. And there was a lot of people that were upset and concerned, and so, you know, the guardians of the flock, namely the bishops and the Pope in particular, just were so worried that he was going to destroy Catholicism with what he was saying, that they shut him down, and then they never really bothered to read him. And I say that because it occurs in everything they say or do. It's clear they didn't read him. Now, he wasn't publishing things at that point, so it would have been a matter of asking him for material, which he would have been glad to give him, or it would have been getting material from other people. It didn't really matter. They weren't reading him. And so that was a great deal of the problem, and that would continue through his life. And by the time in 1947, when he had finished the redo of his Human Phenomenon book, which is his large masterpiece for evolution and talking about that, and really not intended for clerics as such, because it's more of a scientific volume. It was, you know, fine, clerics can read it, but old scientists can read the clerics' things too, so no big deal. But it was intended very much for scientists, and again, their reaction to him was more off of the 1927 positions they had already taken than really reading his material. So how much some one of the priests was assigned to read it, it didn't really matter, because the people he worked for were saying nope, 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 nope. And so no one allowed him to do anything in publishing. The world was ready for him. When he died in 1955, he had made a will, and then he didn't make a will about his 2 things he owned. He made a will about his literature that he wrote, all of it. And he willed his writings to his secretary. So by law, the church couldn't take him and destroy him, or the Jesuits couldn't get him and burn him. Nobody was able to get their hands on him because they weren't available legally to them. His secretary knew the tension he'd been through in the last few years. She hadn't been with him a long time, but she had been with him, and had times she had helped with translations and typing of materials and stuff. So she had worked closely with him for a few years, and there was so much interest in what he was doing and saying that there already was a publisher in the wings waiting to get a chance to go to work. So as soon as he died, that secretary and the publisher got themselves together in a hurry, and they didn't horse around. They went right to getting his materials out. Within 2 to 5 years, he had several books in several languages in their top reading list categories. I mean, he was selling amazingly immediately following his death. I mean, it was a very short time to where he was really going. By 1957, the original translation of the human phenomena, called The Phenomenon of Man, was out and available in English. As we all know now from the human phenomenon, because we've got this book to look at and work with, that Sarah Weber did a fantastic job of reviewing the situation with the first book to correct incorrectness in the language translation, and particularly to see a bigger total picture. And she got access to all kinds of material that had been written by that time, an accumulation of letters and a whole lot of things. And she spent, I think it's 2 or 3 years, putting the translation that we now have together, which came out in 1959. I'm pretty sure it's it might be as many as 5 years. She did not do that in a hurry. She went through and read and studied and gathered and then translated. And so the work that we have, the human phenomena today, is quite a lot better, more readable, and very much more accurate to what Teilhard was trying to say to his audience. And so those are some facts. But along the way, even though he took that book personally, I believe, down to Rome to argue his case, because what had happened, he'd been trapped in China for a series of nearly 10 years, but in China he was trapped and he couldn't go out on expeditions because in the wartime there was a great civil war unrest in China, and it wasn't totally unsafe to do that. And so he didn't, and he stayed in what was Peiping at the time, now Beijing, and he worked on some museum things and upgraded his human phenomena book with more sophistication and careful reading, so he wasn't going to be mistaken and misunderstood. And then also he worked on studying comprehensively the languages of India, China, and Japan, because he wanted to see how they fit into the picture of the evolutionary site that he had unfolded, and then what the future for evolution would be, and what those religions and their place might be. So he had done that, and in the process of doing that, he came to some conclusions about those religions and about what they do and don't say, and how useful they would be. In the Christic, having gone through all that, and having spent that time, and then traveling and being in America, then he comes to write the Christic. He has all that behind him. And it's very interesting to me that some of the conclusions that he comes up with. Let me change the scope of my camera slightly. I think I can make it better. Let's get it.
Well, he's written this in New York, right?
Yes, he did this in New York. He would have written this in New York. Indeed, he would have written it in New York. I think I'm going to do this. And we're going to try and pull away a little bit there. Now I got to pull my chair around to where I want the picture. Okay.
Just generally speaking, what would you say phenomenon of man or the human phenomenon is about?
Well, it's a discussion of evolution, and it is for the purpose of showing how the evolution occurs, what the steps of it were, and then what its relationship is when it becomes up to the question of reflective consciousness, humankind. And then he spends a good bit of time on that particular part. Half of the book is all the steps of getting to humankind, and so you get an idea of how he saw what evolution was, and how you get around to understanding the mechanisms. He then took, and remember what I've said, that he takes those same mechanisms and applies them to what lies ahead. And that's where he really gets exciting, is when he begins to describe where evolution is going to go. Now, I need to make a couple of points about the nature of where, and it's in the Christic that you will see this. You need to understand his approach to this and his work that he had done to look at the other religions and what he came to. He said that the three religions that he looked at into, and at other times he would speak specifically of Hinduism, or he would speak specifically of the Buddhists and so on of China. He pointed out that they did not carry nearly deep enough understanding of the Spirit of God in their understandings to carry what he really was saying in the nature of evolution and in the nature of the future. And so he couldn't use them. He honored them. Whenever he talked about them, he honored them for whatever he could say positive about them. And when you read the various places where he talks about the Eastern religions, you'll see that he is not mean about it. He is factual when he says, from my point of view and reviewing my study, the facts show me that they don't have the depth of spirit understanding. Well, none of those have a really good Trinitarian concept. And spirit, in all of Chardin's work, the Trinitarian concept is very, very important. Now, so having set those aside, when he's coming to the Christic, without saying it, he does in a way or two in the text, but he sets aside the average and the typical religion of Christianity, being first of all Catholicism to him, because that's where he was coming from, but then the non-Catholic Protestant traditions, and he sets them aside. And so you need to know he's doing that because he's going to talk about things in a way in which he will say only the real ability to cover the understanding of the evolutionary cycle that brings us to humankind is Christianity. He's clear about that. At the same time, he's setting it aside. So you say, wait, what's going on here? He does the same thing with Catholics. And he says in the Christic that the only religious expression that's available to him to really talk about the future of the evolutionary picture is the Catholic background and understandings. At the same time, he's set it aside in a sense. So you have to understand he's not being mean to anybody. He's trying to say to everybody, wake up. And he's trying to say to the Christians, your old ways of doing theology and scripture and so on are got to be updated. You don't have it. You are not complete, and you can't operate in cold cubic form. That this is the box that holds the knowledge of everything Catholics have to say about this or that, and that's that. He says you can't do that. He says truth is in motion as much as the world is in motion. Truth is in unfolding as much as environment is unfolding. And if you try to lock the truth up in a box, he said, you're going to not make the truth. And so he dismisses any efforts by anybody to hold in a box static kinds of truth. And he does the same thing to scientists, who he says the same thing of. They do the same thing, and he said it's equally bad. And he said that sets up a dualism between the two, the science and religion, and that only ends in a fight that doesn't get solved and hurts everybody. So he's very, very specific about that, and he's very coy about the way he says it here, because he doesn't hammer that. But it took me a while to see that's what he was doing, because I would run into these double statements. I say, wait a minute, what's he saying? Well, I realized he's just setting everything aside that is not up to date. And he's saying, you've got to get up to speed. You've got to get up to speed if you really want to see. So what he's doing is, he's telling you what his inner being has been for a lifetime. updated material. And you got to understand, he began updating his material about religion and philosophy, but religion and theology. He began updating long before he got around to 1955 when he died. His updating, he knew he was updating in the war years when he wrote in times of war, articles in times of war. When he wrote that, he knew he was updating, and he was very, in some ways, using that poetic prose of his in a way to kind of soften that approach so he wouldn't clobber so many toes. He wasn't out to do that, but he knew good and well what he was saying, and he had some people he was talking to that were in the same framework and flow. So his sister Marguerite was very clearly one of those people. Then his cousin, and his name's Marguerite too, isn't it? And Marguerite's cousin later on he would get very close to her, and they were able to share and communicate. He was sharing with some Jesuit priests that were important at the time, and he always had a way of sharing within the context of the lay women that were important in his life, and his sister and his cousin were very important, and other women came into place that really liked what he was saying, really liked the man, fell in love with him, wanted to marry him. You know, he had all kinds of things going on, and he'd hold it all off and say, no, that's not where I'm going to go, and he wouldn't get involved with them in that sense, but he really did feed on that relationship he had with women. He greatly believes that women bring to a picture of the whole of history that men don't, and you need to have both parts functioning. So all of that's in the background of this article on the Christic, and it's a mouthful. I appreciate that, but that's why I wanted to talk about it a little bit, because I needed to give you some background to this thing. And I don't have any doubt that we're going to come to a point where, in a sense, we're going to shift gears to a book study kind of thing, or a manuscript study kind of thing, that we're going to be back in the Christic some more. We're not going to get it finished, and you're not going to be satisfied if I left it all here. So I don't worry about that. Still coming. Now let me get to some points here, because it's very important that you see some principles. A principle that comes up in the early writing is his awareness of the complexity of co-reflection, and his continual push on the scientists. I mean, he's pushing on them every time he gets a chance to push on the biologists, for instance, to quit treating man as just simply another animal. And if you take a look at history of the way humankind has been treated by science and biology, that's the way it's been done. Well, he's another animal, he's got a lungs, and he's got a heart, and he does this, and it's a little bit different here, but it's the same thing there, and you know, and what he said, you can't do that. He's totally different. How totally different is humankind? That's an interesting question. I almost hate to put it on a tape, but I'm going to tell you a little story of how totally different I think humankind is. I had the occasion in my life to take care of a very tragic situation of a man who died, and he was in the cab of his over-the-road truck, and he was very, very ripe when people found out that what was going on. So I had the job of cleaning the cab, and it was very interesting. I couldn't figure out what was bothering me. A day or two into it, and I finally realized what it was. The odor of human flesh in that condition, decaying, is very different from the odor of animals decaying, and it's borderline sweet. And I couldn't figure out what was bothering me, because I've been around as a boy growing up. We didn't have the kind of landfill you had nowadays. We had a dump site, and we had to go put things out there, and there were dead animals out there all the time being tossed over there. They didn't smell anything like that occasion of me taking care of the guy called Charlie. And when I realized what it was, that kind of half sweetness, and I thought, yeah, that's right, the human flesh just is different. So I think the difference in the co-reflection gets into our body also. And
So
he's saying,
what does that mean?
What?
Co-reflection, what does that mean?
okay, co-reflection, an animal can sit down and remember things, an animal can react to things. And from that reaction and memory, it can do lots of things that are pretty fascinating. What the animal never does, it never knows that it knows. It never says, I know that I know. That's co-reflection. And that co-reflection that I know that I know, I am that I know I am because I know that I am. And that was even what Descartes, I think it was, that made a big deal out of that sentence or that concept about his whole philosophy. And so the co-reflection is the ability for us to reflect on to step out of ourselves and reflect on ourselves, to reflect on the meaning of how we think and act, to reflect on our history and what its meaning is, to reflect on an invention and what it could be, to do the kind of things that we do in looking forward and backward and in time at ourselves. That's co-reflection. A chimpanzee got 96% of the same DNA that I got. And I'm not a chimpanzee, and it's not a human being. And what makes us different? It's not DNA. We're not that much different. It's co-reflection. Now, there's some animals once in a while that you wonder if they're getting close to co-reflection or if they, if that's what they are. But I think there's some questions on that really need to be discussed sometimes. I mean, the orca, the killer whale orca, is one very intelligent being. And they got some really interesting procedures and whatnot in their whole social structures that, well, it's a heavy duty trip to look at that. I'm not going to try and answer that question. All I know is that we came at an evolutionary stage at a time when co-reflection became what we are. And when we entered co-reflection in its complexity, one of the things that we have is knowledge in a whole different way, but we also have will in a whole different way. And we can choose to know the truth over here and do the different. Animals don't do that.
What's the co in co-reflection?
The fact you got you and you
Okay.
together looking at each other.
Okay.
And, it's a co-reflection. It's to reflect. It's reflection back across.
It's not just me.
Huh?
It's not just me.
No, and it's you doing a look at you, and that's both exciting, and it's made the nature of what we are. Now look, I got a little thing to tell you. There's a whole lot of human beings who don't use co-reflection very much, I think, or very little, I suspect. I mean, really are. Children can be more co-reflective and start asking very interesting questions. A lot of times people that are burdened down with being robots, either as a child or as a worker, they quit doing much in co-reflection. They aren't really contributing too much to the whole story. But anybody that studies anybody within the wonderment of humankind begins to see the power of co-reflection enter the human family. And even such a thing as a very ancient question of co-reflection: did one strand of the human family kill the other? And there's a very high likelihood that's exactly what happened, that one strand of co-reflective primates, or human beings, killed off the Neanderthals, because they fall out of existence without much warning. And they've got co-reflection. We know that from their art on the wall and their tools and the things, that they were co-reflective. They might have been a rudimentary variety, and it took a long time for co-reflection to get to a lot of different stages. That's true. And so from the time of 5,000 years ago, we begin to see the co-reflection really making a difference in the families of humans in a lot of cultures, whether it be Africa or Egypt or into Asia and Europe. I mean, it really begins to make a difference. And the way that they go about making society, the way they go about doing more, the way they go about being family members and raising children, that co-reflection becomes much more clear. In writing, when we can get to writing, it took another whole step, because all of a sudden now, what he's writing over there, I can see over here, and so I can start reflecting back and forth on all that. And that becomes important in the development of co-reflection. And every stage of how we store knowledge is a major step in all of humanity's history. And so one of the first ones is taking things out of just speaking and stories and song to writing. That's a huge step. And one of the steps of that, the first one is stone. Well, stones are hard to carry around. If you're going to have a book of stones, I mean, you got a problem. And so somebody, and a huge next step was getting it to hide some papyrus, where they could write on something that was able to be stored in the library. And so we wind up with a huge amount of information about man's history in the library at Alexandria that gets destroyed in a fire. And that's great harm to our development, because we don't know those stories anymore. Well, after we finally get around to writing, I mean, we finally get around to paper, that really helps everything. And then somebody, and boy, what a breakthrough when the printing press was figured out. Because my goodness gracious, now we can get this thing out to 20 people at one time to look at it and talk about it. Or we can send it out to everybody and we'll get together and have a discussion. And then we'll decide who's right and wrong. And all kinds of things. Or no, we'll write something down the Magna Carta on paper so that it can be published other times, and then we'll fight about it. Now we'll decide we're going to hang on to it. I mean, if we didn't have the Constitution on paper, where would we be today? It was bad enough, we're about to lose it anyway. But it really would have gotten lost if we hadn't had it on paper to pass around, and the Declaration of Independence, all those things. The next major step we get into that is just absolutely gets crazy is probably the wireless tape recorder and film, where we can start handling information in another medium that is very, very flexible, and that's lots of things. And boy, it grows up. And you just look what happened with recording devices that went from wire, which were my dad had one. I know what that went through. You don't believe it when those go bad. You got a bundle of wire in your hand. What are you gonna do? Anyway. Then they went to little tapes, and then that big tapes, and then it went to little tapes, and then it kept getting downer fighter, and then all of a sudden, and not that very many years ago, I think in the 70s, we came to a transistor, and we began, as one man, I like the way he puts it, we began writing in light. And that's
storing in light.
Storing in light. And writing in light. And that's a huge, huge, huge development. I mean, I know of a study that was done on a crystal. And that crystal, you take and you shine a color into it, and on that color you let it ride terabytes of information. Terabytes, not megabytes or whatever the other ones are, but terabytes. And you put it in there. And it's in this little crystal, okay? And then all they did was change the color to another color, and it was completely empty again. So they filled it up again with a different color. Every color they filled it up with. And there are terabytes in every one of the colors, and it's retrievable. I mean, folks...
Well, what's a terabyte?
A terabyte is 1 million megabytes. I believe that's what it is.
I just remember
It's way a lot of memory.
more than we can grasp.
Yeah, right. The mind doesn't go much past 100 in terms of really grasping things. If you want to know what you can grasp, you can't grasp much more than 100. So all of that, and the co-reflection. So he says, that the scientists have disappointed us because we have not dealt with what the complexity of co-reflection is. And see, one of the things that you get into is in the book on the phenomenon of the human phenomenon, you get into the fact of the spirit presence within everything. Okay? And one of the aspects of spirit presence in all the stuff of creation is the push towards unity. And the spirit is gently causing everything to get unified. Well, you start thinking about that a little bit, and then we start seeing it that animals experience a different level of unity. And so we got those elk out here in herds that are unified. And you know, and there's all kinds of things that go into that. But then you come up in co-reflection, and we get in one of the most complex forms of unity that we don't know what to do with, and how to film, how to write books about, or how to explain, and that's love. But that's what it is. It is a co-reflective approach to unity. And it is quite different than what the animals have. Okay? And we can prove that by just looking around at the complexity of the books that are written, the movies made about all that. But that's where we're at. See, and he says, and he looks, and just in the second page he says, I saw how the joint coming of the age of revelation and science had suddenly opened a door for the 20th century. Man into a sort of an ultra dimension of things in which all differences between action, passion, and communion vanish. He's seeing ahead of his time when he said that. A bunch. We're just barely beginning to look at that as a possibility. And he saw that as the coming future. And he saw that as being able to happen because of what was co-reflection was getting the degree it had come to. Now, can you imagine if the parameters of communion vanished and we all could just be in communion? We'd be getting along in this world. And we'd be getting along with nations, and color would mean nothing, and history would mean nothing. We'd be in communion. That's a huge important concept in co-reflection. So
But what does it mean that they vanish?
That the differences between even these three things are no longer different. Action, passion, and communion all are mixed into one.
Oh, okay.
But it also says, yeah, that's not going to happen until we get people in. I mean, people have got to get their actions in order if we're going to get in communion. You know, they got to get their passions in order if we're going to have to get that unified. All that's got to get unified. But that's all falls meaningless at the fullness of what co-reflection is directed to becoming. And so. And he says, then I saw the universe becoming amorized and personalized in the very dynamism of its own evolution. Now, that sentence then gets into a whole bunch of the next pages, because he's talking here about the fact that the universe becomes centered and expressed in love. Now, see, way back a little bit. When he sees divinity creating things, it's all out of love. And it's all intended to wind up in love. So, he sees love in its rudimentary forms in spirit, that desire for unity, as being a little bit of a hint of that coming together and beginning to happen. And he says, as it goes along and it comes to co-reflection, and where we need to get to is where all of the universe is established in love. Because love is the center of the universe, of everything. And when you finally figure that out, boy, you start liking people and getting along with them really good. And even no matter how bad and stinky they are, you do. And so he sees the universe heading towards this amorization, this love center, but at the same time, and this is extremely important, he sees it for the co-reflective hand moving at the same time to individual personalization. That the love that is meant to be centered and to be the fullness of all that is to come is never going to destroy the individual personalization. That's a big, vast concept. And he sets about showing how the personalization comes from the complexification of consciousness that raises it up all the time, and its unity and its growth is to individual personalization. And he shows on the side, that's on the side of the outside of things in a sense. On the inside of things, looking at the divine, and in the middle of it, that at the same time it's rising to the fullness of complete amorization or love. And he says that's really what the omega point is going to be, is the conjunction of that at the same time in complete fullness. Now, isn't this amazing how we are barely touching the convergence of the universe, which is one part of this, and he talks about all the parts that you need to see, and then he gets into some difficult concepts. But every time he's doing this, he's trying to tell you that's what he's been living with. When he gets on this third page and talks about, he says that the stuff of the universe is all around us, and it's drifting into homogeneous kind of things in a sense. But at first he says there's a couple of things. It presents itself to our experience as a distinctly recognizable process, the process of the universe around us, or more correctly as the product of two processes, which is by nature subject to direction. First, there is the process of arrangement. So he talks about arrangement on the external side of things. On the outside of things, you really have to deal with arrangement all the time, and then you have to look on the inside and see why it's happening and where it's going. I mean, the fact that you have arrangement happening, see, Darwin said it was haphazard. The arrangement was just kind of like it just, you take a computer and put it in a jar and shake it up until it finally falls into working. That's kind of the problem of Darwin's kind of approach to things in evolution, is because it was haphazard. He's saying, no, it's not. He's saying that spirit gives it direction and holds it together from the beginning and knows it's going someplace. It uses a lot of trial and error so that there's a room for the development of free will and co-reflection. If there were no trial and error in the earlier parts of evolution, there would be no co-reflection and will. So it's kind of curious how that works, but it's very definitely going someplace. And then he says, he brings in this very difficult thing, there's the process of disarrangement. And he says, we've got to deal with that too. And he says, basically what he's saying is, if you don't look at the inside of things, you're going to have problem with arrangement and disarrangement. You're going to really struggle with this, because the only answer to a disarrangement and arrangement being together at the same time is going to lie within the spirit of divinity. And so you see, he brings up hard things when he talks like that.
What would be an example of disarrangement?
An animal dying and turning back to dust, and that dust going completely, using up all the energy that dust has got to where it's just motionless particles that have no movement or energy in them whatsoever. That's where it goes if you don't know that there is spirit in everything. And that picture is the hopelessness of the age today, because a lot of people feel that way, that we're not really ever going to get anywhere. We're just kind of beating time, and we're really not able to progress anywhere. Because a lot of people believe that, and that scientists have set the stage for that belief, because science with only the outside look always comes to that position of entropy, and it's a very, very disheartening picture. If you watch the videos and watch sci-fi videos, they're on that topic all the time. That humanity's never going to get any place except extinction. And if that extinction happens, then everything else can get extinguished too. And it basically is saying, hey, that universe, no matter how big you are and how much energy you got to spin all those galaxies, you're going to run out. All of you. And you're going to come to nothing. Just a universe full of nothing, but motion, no energy. Now that's a theoretical statement, and of course it doesn't wash. I'll give you one little simple example. There's always the problem of the body decaying, whichever kind we want to talk about, humans, animals, or anything else, raising up a new flower. It gets eaten by a cow. Dead thing that was going to dust, to working again. You know, so anyway, I have a little fun with that, but that's kind of really. So one of the things then that you have to understand to get into Christic is his underpinning comprehension of the incarnation. Now, by the incarnation, I'm talking about the second person of the Blessed Trinity becoming involved in creation. Okay? Now you notice how I said that. I didn't say just that he became man born of Mary. I said that when the incarnation, and see this is what Chardin points out, that when you have spirit in the stuff of creation as an aspect that is just as real as matter is an aspect, spirit is an aspect. One's kind of the outside things and one's the inside things. You can look at it that way a little bit. That spirit factor is of divinity. But you never have a spirit factor in anything that doesn't include the Word.
But matter also has divinity, he said.
Yes, that's what he's saying. It has divinity within it. Yes, he does. Absolutely says that.
Well,
Because
that's why he's misunderstood as a pantheist.
Because people think that that matter is going to be God. No, it's God in matter. He never lost sight of divinity. He just says it's far closer and proximate to us than you ever thought. It's in this table. It's in this sheet of paper. Divinity's in everything. Everything. And when you understand that, when you finally begin to realize, I am matter and spirit, but all that is too, then I'm related to all that. Then I ought to take care of it. I ought not to abuse it. I ought not to disfigure it or make it ugly.
So matter and spirit would be of the same value.
Matter and spirit are the same aspect of the stuff of creation. See, if you say God created matter, then you got no place to put spirit, because you put it out there someplace, got to get it in there. But when you say the stuff of creation, and you just say the stuff of creation and don't try to find stuff, then you say stuff is matter and spirit together always the same time. Now, in the initial creation, spirit is very dispersed and minimized. Okay, it's there, but it's not. But when it starts coming together, the spirit becomes more present in the situation, and the need for spirit is important to the spirit reflection. Co-reflection needs to know that. Look, I can take baking soda and vinegar and make a nice little bump, a nice little explosion, or I can take and put it in a little boat and put it around the bathtub. You've certainly done all those things with that because you got a reaction going on. But I also, there's a certain amount of care I got to give that, and so in a chemistry class, when you start playing around with things with a little more power than that, you put goggles on, and you also don't mix certain things. You don't put oxygen where it doesn't belong. where where everything's gonna try to grab it and blow up. You know, you learn to take care of it because you got to. That's the spirit part of our co-reflection, taking care of spirit development in that. What do you think's going on with the atomic bomb and the hydrogen bomb? We have really had to grow up our spirits in order to handle that. And we have not always done it well. I mean, bad enough that we don't handle explosives, and we got bombs going off in New York and Minnesota and you know, and over in the Far East, and it's doing lots of damage. I mean, over 20 health workers killed